What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another video for you guys, and this is going to be the start of a new thread that I want to spread out to all of the metal YouTubers out there, because, well, my boys over at Thralls of Metal have been talking about debut albums for a long time so far in this year, so I'm like, you know what, how about we show some love towards some sophomore albums? So for this video, I am going to be talking about 10 bands whose sophomore album is the band's best album, at least in my opinion. And yeah, I would love to encourage discussion on this, and in fact, pretty soon after this video is posted, there will be a new thing in the community tab on the YouTube page where I'll be asking you guys to comment in the community tab, what do you think is a band's best sophomore album, or whose sophomore album is the band's best album, etc., etc., etc. And I'll come back and do a response to it and see what happens. But for now, I have 10 albums here, in my opinion, that are sophomore albums that are a respective band's best album, at least in my opinion. Some of these you're probably going to already know due to rankings in the past, but some might be some curveballs thrown at you coming your way. And without further ado, let's get started with the first one, and that is Asix, Last One on Earth. I ranked Asix a couple of years ago, and this was my clear-cut number one. I mean, this is, in my opinion, arguably still the greatest Death Doom album of all time. And it's not entirely Death Doom. Like, there's still plenty of, like, thrashiness to it, but it's still very doomy. It's still death metal. I mean, the opening track, MS Bismarck, really kind of sets the stage for this album with, like, the faster up-tempo sections, but also those big, doomy stomps. It's just everything you want out of a Death Doom album. And then the Crusher really solidifies that Doom aspect, but it gets perfected on the title track. And the title track I've talked about is arguably the best song Asix ever wrote. But there's other killer tracks like Streams of Ancient Wisdom, the song Asix Forgotten War, but you do get some more thrashy barn burners like Serenade and Lead, The Incarnation of Lust, Food for the Ignorant. Like, those songs have a lot of the thrashiness that I associate Asix with, but still has plenty of doom to it. And also, of course, I mean, the production, the guitar tone, everything about it is just monstrous. Martin Van Druenen's vocals are absolutely insane. After all, I still don't know how the hell he does it. Same with John Tardy from Obituary. I have no idea how in the fuck those two guys nail those vocals, but it's astonishing to me. But yeah, Asix, Last One on Earth would be my personal pick for Asix's best album, and it was their sophomore effort in 1992. Next up, we have Cancer, Death Shall Rise. This, 1991, at the height of death metal's popularity, well, between, I would say, like 1991 and 1994, I would say was where death metal was at its most popular. Arguably, it's been getting a lot more popular lately, but this album, I think, is absolutely fantastic, and I would say the band's best album. I mean, top to bottom, you know, recorded at Morrisound by the one and only Scott Burns, and does a fantastic job. Granted, I am going to say, I think the guitar tone and the drum tones are very similar to Sepultura Arise, and I think it was because both albums were recorded at the same time, so probably Sepultura allowed Cancer to use their tone and also the drum sound, because maybe they just didn't switch them out, which I think works. It kind of adds a little bit of like an extra oomph to this album. But I mean, Hung, Drawn, and Quartered, featuring Glenn Benton from Deicide doing guest vocals, Tasteless Incest, Burning Casket, the title track, Back from the Dead, I would say is like one of my favorite like triplet stompers in death metal history. And of course, this album featuring the one and only legendary James Murphy on lead guitar. This was after his time in Death and Obituary the year before, and this was before he formed Disincarnate and then going to Testament. So yeah, this album I think is a very underrated gem in death metal's history. Although one could argue this is death thrash, because it is very, very thrashy, but there's still tons of death metal to it, and I absolutely love it. Hell, I was listening to this while mowing the lawn. It's still that amazing. So yeah, Cancer, Death Shall Rise. Next up, this one might be a bit of a hot take, considering I know this band's debut is very much beloved, but this one I think is a bit better. Cromag's Best Wishes. 1989, these New York hardcore / crossover thrash legends. I mean, I'm a pretty big fan of early Chromags, like Age of Quarrels, a fun hardcore album that has its metal moments. This is where I think the metal influence really shines through. Basically, this is more of a thrash metal album with little glimmers of hardcore, but honestly, I would just call this a straight-up thrash album. Also, Harley doing the vocals. I think he's a better vocalist than John Joseph, at least in my personal opinion. Excuse me. And of course, I think the songwriting definitely got better as they're writing longer tracks, heavier guitar sounds, and also a lot more energy to it, I would say. I mean, the opening track, Death Camps, was one of my favorite drum intros and guitar solos of that late 80s crossover era. The Only One's a really cool, fun, catchy, almost Danzig vocal style. It was really cool. Down But Not Out is a thrashy ripper. Then and Now with that really cool, almost funky bass line. And I think this album is really where Harley shows that he's a phenomenal bassist as well. And then the song Age of Quarrel with that military snare at the beginning. And then it's just this big stomper with thrashy moments. It's just everything about this album. I listened to this album so much in high school. Only got the CD a few years ago, and this is an OG copy, by the way, and I got it for very cheap, so I was really, really happy to have this in the collection. But yeah, Cromag's Best Wishes, I would say, in my opinion, Cromag's best album. Highly recommend if you love hardcore and thrash. There you go. Next up, and this is going to be one that'll be no surprise if you watched my ranking, Darkthrone, A Blaze in the Northern Sky. I would still say, in terms of Norwegian black metal, it's definitely between this and Emperor's In the Nightside Eclipse for the best Norwegian black metal album of all time. And I think I would give the edge to A Blaze in the Northern Sky just because there's a lot going on songwriting-wise. You get your classic black metal tropes of blast beats and tremolo riffs, but you also get some death metal tremolos here and there where they sound a little more on the low end. Lots of doomy stomps, some groove, some triplet stomps. Just every song kills on here. Catharian Life Code and The Shadow of the Horns, Paragon Belial, Where the Cold Wind Blows, the title track. Pagan Winter is such an awesome closer. And I mean, just, again, I would say top to bottom in terms of what I would say is the best Norwegian black metal album. This was it. And in terms of full lengths, this was the one that kickstarted the entire scene. Yeah, you had Mayhem, due to Death Crush EP, but it was, I think, really this album that truly spearheaded the entire Norwegian black metal movement for years to come. And of course, raw production, very rough around the edges, but it absolutely works. So yeah, I can never say anything bad about this album. This album's classic, one of my maybe top 20 favorite albums of all time. If I ever do a video about my favorite albums of all time, I'm gonna have a hard time with that. But yeah, this is phenomenal. If you haven't listened to it, how the hell are you here? Alright, next up we get one that might be a bit of a hot take considering the album that came out after this gets a lot of love too, but in my opinion, Fear Factory's Demanufacture is the best Fear Factory album. I mean, 3 years after their Raw debut, Soul of a New Machine, where it was definitely more of a death metal album, maybe even death grind, thrash, this still has some death metal aspects to it and lots of thrash and groove, but this is definitely where they pushed more towards industrial. Like, the overall tone definitely sounds more mechanistic, and of course, songwriting wise, they get better. I mean, immediately with the opening title track, Self Bias Resistor is a beast of a song. Zero Signal might be my favorite Fear Factory song of all time. But of course, you do have Replica, which was like a big hit for them. Also, re-recording of Christ or Piss Christ, Dog Day Sunrise, which I think was a cover song. I'm pretty sure it was a cover song, but yeah, just top to bottom, whenever it comes down to industrial metal, Fear Factory is really the band I go to if I have a fix for industrialized metal. Well, them, and to a lesser extent, Rammstein and Godflesh, but it's really Fear Factory, in my opinion, that does industrial metal right. Whereas, you notice a lot of industrial metal bands tend to be more industrial bands that incorporate metal elements. This case, a metal band incorporating industrial elements. I prefer that version of industrial metal, where it's metal bands incorporating industrial as opposed to the other way around. But yeah, this album, I would say, is one of the best 90s metal albums of all time. Definitely check it out if you've slept on it. Alright, we're halfway through the list. Time to get back to some more extremity. Next up, I have Hooded Menace, Never Cross the Dead. This one I really struggled with because I love the majority of the Hooded Menace catalog. Even the albums I don't like as much are still very good. And I was debating whether or not to put this on the list because I love Effigies of Evil, absolutely love the last album, The Trident of Spell, and I can't wait for whatever they have coming up next. But I would say this is arguably Hooded Menace's best album. I mean, 2010, so this was, their second album, obviously. But this one, I've been listening to this a lot recently, or at least gone back to it. It still hits. Like, it is one of the heaviest guitar tones I've ever heard. It's almost HM2. I wouldn't be surprised if they used the HM2 pedal, but they tweak it to sound a little bit cleaner. And, I mean, just the songs. The title track, I just love that, like, ascending, descending melody that sounds like zombies coming out of hell, getting ready to maul you. Terror Castle is a killer track, as the Rituals of Mortal Cremation. That song has some really cool melodies. Same with Night of the Death Cult. From Their Confined Slumber, I really, really like. And then even the closing track where they do the theme for Return of the Evil Dead, which was like a European, I think like Spanish horror film. And it's really cool. Hell, I've even thought about using it as a pro wrestling theme for video game. Haha. But yeah, I think in terms of top to bottom, what makes Hooded Menace, this is the album in my opinion. Alright, next up, and this one's probably going to come as no surprise, considering, this band's been, hit or miss lately, but I went with Pestilence Consuming Impulse for my pick for Pestilence Best Album. I mean, 1989, almost into 1990, they were on Roadrunner at this point, and of course, their debut album, Malleus Maleficarum, was a fantastic debut. Definitely more of a thrash metal album than death metal, whereas this pretty much embraced death metal. Still has a lot of thrash to it, but it's definitely far more towards death metal. Almost like this was like the Dutch version of Death Leprosy, which I know some people might be shocked I didn't pick that. I personally think there's one other Death album a little bit better, but that's just me. Whereas Consuming Impulse, I mean, this album, top to bottom, just like everything about it, I absolutely love. From this album cover and just the songs, like Process of Suffocation, The Trauma, Chronic Infection, Out of the Body, Echoes of Death, Defy Thy Master. Not a wasted moment on this album whatsoever. And I actually really like how raw it sounds and just how gnarly and gritty it is. And of course, this was when Martin Van Drunen really created his own vocal style, whereas with Malleus Maleficarum, he was definitely more on the thrash delivery. Here is where he get his iconic vocals at the very beginning. And it's a shame this was the last album he ever did before he was kicked out of Pestilence over a year later. But thankfully he joined Asix and made them even more incredible. So yeah, Pestilence, Consuming Impulse, in my personal opinion, Pestilence best album. We got a few more left, and now this next one, I know there's probably going to be a fair amount of debate, but I did rank this number one in the discography I did for this band, and that is Sodom, Persecution Mania. I know a lot of people like to give a lot of love to Agent Orange, and I totally understand. I happen to like the more grittier, nastier sound of Persecution Mania more than Agent Orange. I mean, this was really the turning point in Sodom's career, whereas early on, lots of Venom worship, you know, like In the Sign of Evil EP and Obsessed by Cruelty, their debut album, which was very, very rough, but I love it still. Whereas this pretty much moved away from like first wave black metal or speed metal and into straight up thrash and becoming one of the leaders of German thrash metal. I mean, Nuclear Winter's one of the best thrash songs of the 80s. I love Electrocution. Their cover of Motorhead's Iron Fist is really killer too. Enchanted Land, Christ Passion, Bommenheigel, I absolutely love that song. Even the re-recording of Outbreak of Evil they did on here was really, really cool as well. And even the 2-minute interlude, Procession to Golgotha, I really, really like because it's just this big, like, doom march that leads into Christ Passion. And also, I just love, and funny enough, actually, this and Pestilence, Consuming Impulse, both produced by Harris Johns, so definitely some similarities in terms of production, except maybe Pestilence was a little bit more amped up. Whereas this, it's like, yeah, no matter what version of this album, it's very quiet. Hopefully we can get like a remaster of this album in the future where it just sounds louder but clearer as well. But still, I absolutely love this album. No complaints otherwise. In my opinion, Sodom's best album. The penultimate album for this list is Ulcerate, Everything is Fire. In my personal opinion, this is the best Ulcerate album. Even though their new album, Cutting the Throat of God, might be a contender, considering I can't stop listening to that album. But if I have to be honest, this, in my opinion, is the GOAT of Ulcerate albums. After all, 2009, this was their second offering, obviously. New Zealand band mixing technical death metal with some post-metal atmospherics, and now recently incorporating a little bit of black metal. But this album is just absolutely furious and vicious and brutal. I mean, right off the rip with Drown Within, you immediately get what you're asking for, and that's dissonance, technicality, great atmosphere, brutal vocals and drumming. We Are Nile is another fantastic track. Khakis or Kakis, the fourth track, that's just technical death metal wizardry right there. And then I love the opening melodies on Tyranny and The Earth at Its Knees. But the title track, is such a brutal, insane song. I mean, as I keep describing, Ulcerate is basically what would happen if later Gorguts, Immolation, Deathspell Omega, and Neurosis met and had a demented child. This is what they spawned, and that's Ulcerate. And yeah, I would say personally, in terms of what I think is the best Ulcerate album, this is the GOAT, in my personal opinion. And then we got one more, and it's another underrated thrash gem, Zentrix, For Whose Advantage. 1991, or no, 1990 when this came out, and holy shit, I got this album a couple years ago, and I listened to it. Wow, it is incredible thrash metal from the UK. Honestly, this is like, excuse me, honestly, this is like UK's answer to Metallica, particularly And Justice for All and Master of Puppets. More And Justice than Master, personally, but this, I mean, and it's also a little on the technical side, just a little technical, but still catchy and fun, like Questions, the title track. False Ideals is my personal favorite Zentrix track. You also got The Bitter End, Runnin' White-Faced City Boy. Just fun, absolutely fun, and I love the lyrics being, for the most part, anti-PC, which I love because I'm not PC myself at times, and I can appreciate dark humor like that because, you know, and even with me, don't really take that kind of stuff from me serious because, you know, it's just all about fun. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's exactly what Zentrix does. Maybe not to the level of a band like Carnivore, where they just didn't give a shit. This was just mostly just to be silly, but yet also thought-provoking. Lyrically, but musically, I mean, it's just riff after riff after riff after riff. Hook after hook after hook after hook. What more could you want from thrash metal, honestly, other than just speed, riffs, hooks, the whole shebang? And I think this album certainly perfected that formula. And that, ladies and gentlemen, does it for this video of 10 bands whose sophomore albums were their best album, at least in my mind. So, of course, as I brought up at the beginning, since this video is now live, you can go to the community tab on my YouTube page to suggest what bands' sophomore albums do you think are the best, and I will try my best to do a response video to that in the near future because I want to hear what you guys have to say about sophomore albums, like which band's sophomore album do you think was the band's, or was their best, and whatnot, and I will come on here and say if I agree or disagree. Or undecided, like or Undecided John now. We love you anyway. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.
Thank you for your patronage.